Hi, I'm Cameron. Nice to meet you. I didn't. I came in and just a little bit. I'm really tripped out by my dilation of my pupil. Yeah. Hi. Good. Nice to meet you.
Okay, great. Just trying to stay close enough to the mic, but not box you all out. Hi, thank you all for being here. I am Verena. I'm the co-founder of Gossamer. We are a print publication and a brand for what we describe as people who also smoke weed. What that really means is, people who are open to looking at something from a different perspective, maybe trying something new, maybe putting themselves in a maybe unexpected situation and exploring it. And so when the organizers of this incredible exhibition of Bobby Anspach's work reached out and asked if we would be interested in doing some programming around it, even without having tried the machines, which hopefully we'll get into in this conversation, it seemed like a really, really compelling fit from everything I could tell about his mission and his work, and the way he built these incredible spaces to, I think, allow people to have those shifts without any substances and on their own. So thank you all for being here, and I hope some of you were able to try the machines before we get into the conversation, and if not, I believe there's time afterwards as well, so no FOMO. And otherwise, we're here tonight to talk a little bit, the title of the talk, which I don't know how much work we really put into it, but is mindfulness, psychedelics, and the creative output. And I think that was the pithiest way that we could describe a conversation around what it means to have these sort of transcendent experiences, whether it's from meditation, whether it's from body work, breath work, whether it's from, something like psychedelics or plant medicine, or even just communal experiences, and the way those both inform creative work, the experience of creative work as the viewer, as the listener, as the reader, and what it means to put those things out in the world. So without further ado, I also want to introduce the incredible panelists that we have today. I guess I'll go in this order, but we have Nina St. Pierre, who's a writer, an essayist, whose work has appeared in, yes, Gossamer, which is how we brought her in, as well as Harper's Bazaar and Elle and GQ and more. For us, specifically, she's written about cyberdelics, which is sort of the experience of having psychedelic experiences through digital immersion and visuals, complicated grief, prophetic visions, all of which felt very aligned. And her debut memoir, Love is a Burning Thing, which is coming out next May, explores the intersections of mysticism, madness, and class. We have Theo Martins, who is an artist and a creative whose work spans sculpture, music composition, product design, and physical installations. He has also contributed to Gossamer. And he's the founder of Posture Walking Club and a line of breakfast cereal and accessories called Cereal and Such. And we have also Cameron Mesirow, a.k.a. Glass. Is it Mesirow? I should have asked you.
Yeah,
okay.
Right.
A.k.a. Glasser, a singer, songwriter, incredibly talented musician and music producer. And her third album, Crux, just came out last week. So I feel like we should also celebrate that, because putting anything out in the world, I know how much work it takes. So yeah, we are here with them, and I thought they would all have really interesting perspectives on the sort of topic. And I want to open it up by hoping that you all will share, something that could, in some settings, be considered very intimate, but I would love to hear from each of you, like a memorable experience of some form of transcendence, psychedelic or otherwise. I mean, akin maybe to even what you've experienced in these machines before we started. And that could be anything. I would just love to hear from each of you. Nina, why don't you start? I see you nodding.
I'm like, well, do I tell them that or do I tell them that?
Yeah.
There's just so many. I was trying to think back to my first experience, kind of, taking mushrooms at 16 years old, and I grew up in the mountains in Northern California, and I remember I got in a car with someone else who had taken mushrooms and was driving, as we did when we were 16, and we grew up in this mountainous area with these windy back roads, and I remember being in the passenger seat of the car, and this guy was driving way too fast, and if I hadn't, I'm sure I would have been worried about that if I was, sober, and Pantera was playing really loud, and he was just driving around this mountain passes, and I felt like the car disappeared, and I was just moving through space and time, and I don't even like Pantera, but in that moment, I was just trying to get back to the first experience, and hopefully this will connect to things later, because I realized in that moment, it's all in the body, if we can tap into experience in our bodies or translate those to others, that's where the transcendence exists.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Theo.
Very cool. My experience isn't like that, but
That's okay. I'm glad.
I would say for me it was likely when I was young. My father played music growing up and was a DJ, and I soon got into playing music, but I think I was incredibly nervous to play the music, not out of a fear, but I don't know, I think it was like a natural apprehension, maybe an excitement. And I think having sort of, everyone's attended a party or gone to a wedding or something that's been very ceremonious, something like this. But music sort of really being the fulcrum of the energy, like the centerpiece, and I think sort of being the vehicle for that, I think at a young age was like, wow, this is so powerful. And so knowing you could change the mood of everyone or take them on a particular plane, I thought was really fun. And I would say that was sort of the start.
Cool.
Like that. I think also for me, God, I also don't know which type of thing to, but one thing that comes to mind is that there's this club in Berlin called Berghain. And it's sort of a famous club because there are lots of rules, and you can't use a phone, and it basically opens on Friday and closes on Monday morning. And I've never really been a late night person, and so my first time going there, I went on a Sunday morning by myself, and I danced for 8 hours by myself in a very dark place, and just had a realization also that the physical experience of moving in time felt I felt sort of like I was painting, and I didn't do any drugs or anything. I just had some coffee, but I think also the kind of extreme sensory differences, being in a very dark place with a very loud sound, was helped me get into that state, and that's.
Yeah, no, I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to ask that, and I don't know if I'm leaning too close to this, I just got instructions to make sure I was, using the mic. One of the reasons I wanted to ask that, there's probably a joke about listening to other people's like psychedelic trips as interesting as listening to someone else's dreams or whatever. But it was more to just explore the different ways you can experience that. Like obviously, Nina, yours was more of like a traditional psychedelic experience, but that both of you had these like transcendent states through, and that also music was a through line with all of them. But that you had these like transcendent experiences through the connection with other people. Through music, that I think relates so much to this exhibition. I think I'd love to talk a little bit about all of your sort of creative work, because mindfulness is another form of transcendence. However you want to experience it or describe it, the sense of sort of like dissolving your own boundaries, becoming one with like your inner state, and I think that in many different ways can tie into what it means to create something and put it out in the world that doesn't exist otherwise. So I'd be curious if any of you have a relationship with, again, mindfulness, transcendence. These are all sort of words for the same thing, but, Nina, I want to ask you about this later. It's very hard to put words around, but if you have, what your relationship looks like to that, and how it relates to your creative practice, if it does at all. Is it something you explore regularly or intermittently?
That's a good question. Even the side note with Nina regarding words, because I do find that it's very difficult to, like words just have so many meanings. There's so many variables. So you could say car to someone and everyone has a different idea of what the car looks like. And so you sort of extrapolate that to anything you experience in life and why there's so much miscommunication or discord. But simply, I feel like the journey with music that you mentioned the works that I do. There was a reoccurring theme when I was young. It was like, wow, you do a lot of stuff, and I hated it because I would really at the time I wanted to really just have one specific thing. Like, okay, he's a painter. He just does this thing. But it just sort of felt like it just continued to spiral. Like it just continued to unfold, and I was on a journey where I just had to let this thing sort of ride itself out. And so it was really only uncomfortable because I was no longer fitting into these boxes that I could sort of hide in. But the journey has really been interesting in like sort of tracing the root to what's the root of the tree. So like I may design or do other stuff. But it's taken about 10 years to realize, like, oh, okay, like writing and music really is like the center of all this stuff, because that's really, the music comes in and then there are visions to the music. So it's like, oh, what does this look like? What does it feel like? Oh, man, it smells like this. It feels like this. And that's sort of where the products may come from, whether it be cereal or anything or Walking Club. It has always really come from music, and I think, it's been such an interesting journey to sort of get to. Because there really isn't there's no way or plan. It's sort of been like lost in the woods, like finding my way back home, but through feeling it and through like maybe extrapolating things from others, or just what I feel. And I don't know. I don't really even remember the question, but that's sort of what
That's so weird.
Yeah, that's interesting what you said, just kind of like walking through the world, incorporating other things, because for me, I was born to transcendental meditators in a transcendental meditation community in Iowa. My parents were very oriented toward, so transcendence was not just like a possibility, it was sort of like a life goal and expectation, and so, that had various outcomes for me. But one of them being that, like, yes, I do meditate from time to time, probably not as much as I would be helpful for me, but I almost feel like for me, mindfulness, and maybe in reaction to that to some extent, is less of like a practice and more of a state of like being and seeing the world. And so it's much more for me, it's less about like sitting and doing a thing or even having like an individual ceremony than it is about being open when moving through the world and kind of paying attention. And being open sometimes, especially in New York City, is very difficult because if you're open, it's like, wow, it's all coming in. But so maybe for me, my mindfulness practice is more about like finding the right calibration to walk through the world with in which I can be open and kind of like maybe sometimes go through the portals that present themselves, but have, to kind of use a psychedelic term, have the integration period afterward. Like I'm able to bring the outside world in and
what does that
integrate
integration period look like for you? Like when you're taking all this outside inspiration and then...
Yeah, I just think I need a lot of alone time. I mean, I'm a writer, so it's like, that's what we're doing. But even before that was, really what I was doing with my time. I feel like I've always needed a lot of alone time to just process. And I don't always need to be doing some ritualized thing during that time. And for some people, that's really helpful. But I can get there a lot of times by myself. I just need to just kind of be like, have less stimulus and be, just be.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it kind of just made me think of your walking. It's like, it's a walking meditation, but in the world with all the grime of it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't have to answer
Yeah.
that if you...
No,
It doesn't have to be,
I think it's just sort of a philosophical approach, like ultimately trusting myself as like being capable of like getting through whatever comes in my creative zone, like where I can feel safe to explore and really like when it's constant battle actually to really trust yourself, because there's a lot of self-criticism and things like that, but I relate I sort of relate the freedom of exploration to like a feeling of safety, and that those two things kind of are linked.
Are there like tools or settings or things that you, or like patterns or habits that you do to create that sort of safety for yourself in order to feel?
No, I guess I'm using, there's safety in like self-acceptance, but there's also just like the regular living life without like constant fear, which I think we all know a lot of people are not afforded at the moment.
Yeah.
And so like it's really I think it's a lifelong process to trust your instincts, and be kind of accepting of yourself.
Nina, you already mentioned the sort of Theo's Walking Club, but I would love to talk about it a little more, Theo, if you're down.
Yeah, sure.
In an interview you did with Gossamer, you described walking as like a way for you to like feel like to turn your awareness on and to like really see things. I'd love to hear more about walking as a practice, but then also the idea of the walking club, because I think of walking as something that is a very solitary activity in a lot of ways, even though, most of us do it regularly and do it amongst other people. But the idea of walking as like a way to heighten your awareness, but then to do that in a group. Why was it important to create a club or a community around that and to do it with other people?
So it started because I was young, and when my parents immigrated to America, they met a woman who, her name was Myra, and she became like our sort of our American grandma. My grandparents were still in Nigeria, and they would visit, but she was someone who we'd hang and spend a lot of time with and show my siblings and I. And she knew the city very well. And so like we would walk a great deal of places. I grew up in Rhode Island, so it's a small state, and it's quite easy to navigate. But she would walk everywhere, and I didn't like walking. I wasn't a fan of walking. I think I was just young. I don't think you really like anything when you're young. You just want comfort. So I didn't really like walking, but I found that as I got older and I traveled, as I moved around, I found that like when I got places, I think there was always an innate desire to I like to get up and close. I mean, I'm an artist. It's like I want to sort of know something deeply in and out. And walking is sort of a really another way that I found has been very, I say therapeutic with air quotes, but I mean therapeutic, and it's really it's just been such a great practical tool of getting to and fro, because sometimes the idea of like, for me, like getting a car or calling a car service is exhausting. It's like, I just want to get there now, you know. I would rather walk and smell the air and feel good. And sometimes when I do even now get car service, like Uber, if it drops me off, I usually, if I have it set to my house, I want to usually drop me off. Just let me off now, and then I'll walk home. Because I really want the energy of like walking into the house. I feel like as you sit in a car all day, you get up, you go to work, you know, there's really no flow of that energy.
Yeah.
And it became something that I would experience a lot while particularly living in Los Angeles. So I enjoyed it a great deal. And it represented many things. It represented sort of walking away from the industry in many ways, and just a typical way of living. But it became a club because, well, I love it because it is so solitary. It's like a fun, it's such parallel play. I found, if you join any club, nothing wrong against any club, but they are sort of integration. They're sort of integrated rules.
Yeah.
And so there's nothing wrong with those rules, but when you have rules like that, they're sort of designed to be broken. So I was just interested in like whoever's interested in walking. If you're walking in your house to and fro the couch, you're in the club. You know, if you want to walk 10 miles, you're in the club. And many people laughed, but I was sincere, because I'm like, well, what you're doing is enough too. There tends to be like this invisible sort of like a milestone. Like I feel like we operate in the world generally like we're always trying to do things right, because there's like this secret little gold star we're gonna get, and it never appears.
Yeah.
And so walking in many ways is just sort of an accent that like, well, what you're doing right now in the manner that you're doing it works. We could walk together. You're seeing some trees over here. I'm seeing some birds here. And we don't need to agree upon what we saw, because if you saw it, that's great. And if I see something, that's great. But we're experiencing that on this sort of route. And so you could be in Berlin, I could be here, you could be in Nigeria, China, and it was the start of something, and I made an album to coincide with it, so there was music that you can walk to, and there was product. And, you know, it was brandy, but like branded, and but, you know, that was just a way to communicate to folks too, who also want to be a part of it, and who can identify with that beyond it, you know, sort of being funny. Like, truly, yeah, you could walk to the store, that you're part of the club. You know, you don't have to do a 5K. It's cool.
Any walking, you're in.
You're in. It's enough. Yeah.
The sort of what you were saying about there's a bird over here, a tree over here. We don't even see the same thing. I told myself I wouldn't look at my phone during this, but I didn't write this down. The first thing I read on Bobby Anspach's site was part of his artist statement. It was the first couple of lines, which is, one time I saw the most beautiful world in the world inside my head. I told my brother to paint it, but he could only see the world inside of his head, so he didn't know what I was talking about. And that feels, one, so like basic and profound. You know, we all experience the world and the same things, but never really in the same way, and it is so hard to put to words, to art, to music, what those feelings are, and these creative outputs are the ways in which we can like share those experiences. Like that's what Bobby's machines are. As artists and creators, I think there's a lot of ways to then think about what you're putting out in the world and what you are hoping to elicit from the people consuming it, like your readers or your listeners. And I would love to hear maybe from you to start, like, because I think music is such a common, accessible way that people do that. You know, you create music in order to elicit, hopefully, an emotion or an experience from someone you may never meet, and you may never even know when they're listening to your music or what they're experiencing. So, yeah, I guess how conscious are you of what you're trying to accomplish with your music when you create it?
Actually, I think that it relates kind of more to what I was just talking about, that like actually letting go of expectation for people to like find something in particular in a song that I make. That's like been like one of the most liberating creative things, just to say like, you know, I'm not sure what people are gonna think of this or what they're gonna feel from this, but like I guess more like, again, trusting in myself that like if I have an experience, then that experience is available to others, and hopefully since I'm not making like statements of violence, or I'm hoping not to, I think that's kind of where I'm at right now. But like I've always been interested in music as like a world creating mechanism, and music is like an atmosphere and a mood, and it's like kind of what Theo was saying, like you just don't know what other people are gonna get from it at all, but hopefully they find that experience.
Nina, sort of similar question, but I think specific to writing, which is, what we just said. It's even hard to do this conversation because it's hard to put words to these like very ephemeral, personal, transcendent experiences. Like there's a reason there's like all this mysticism and sort of unclear, like a lack of clarity associated with it. I think as a writer, you very specifically, I would say, you write about topics that are very hard to put words to. I'm curious how you approach that and how you think about how to accomplish, like, writing about a cyberdelic experience, writing about, complicated grief, prophetic visions in a way that not just allows people to understand exactly what you're trying to say, but maybe also then experience, some of those things as they read it.
Yeah, I mean, I've thought a lot actually about like, I guess kind of a catch-all phrase would be like esoteric language, if we're talking about like new age terminology, mystical language, and how it kind of like can cloak things. It's both like hollow. I mean, I'm specifically like, there's a lot of ways to approach that question, but if we're thinking about like, how do you describe it, a sacred experience of the sacred, of the sublime, of something transcendent. I feel like a lot of the language that we have is both sort of ephemeral and hollow at the same time, or that's how I find it. I mean, there are kind of these big ideas like love, or you could go in this machine. I feel like if I stayed in there for 3 hours by myself, I would remember that like love is everything, but it's like, what the hell does that mean? It's like it means something when you experience it, and it's incredibly profound. But when you put it in a book or in a piece and you go like, guys, did you know like love's everything? It's just like, oh my God, just like, what a hack. Like, it's not profound. It doesn't strike you. So I think sometimes, it can be hollow. It can also be sort of like Gossamer, actually, kind of flimsy, like, okay, so it's astral travel. It's like, what does that mean? So I think I'm really invested in trying to concretize these experiences, and not because I think that there isn't value to like them just being that sort of like wavy, but to your point, to try to translate to a reader, and it's not, if I'm writing about something, especially my particular experience, I'm, to your point, not invested in them having that experience, but it kind of like activating their cells in a way that is unique to their experience, so it's like but we can have many versions of the same thing. It's basically what you're saying. What we did, Verena and I did this before, and it was like, oh, that's what I thought of when you said that, because I thought, oh, we're both in here seeing the same thing almost, but probably having very different experiences. So on a concrete level, I think it's really about like unpacking the terms, to use like an annoying grad school terminology, but really trying to concretize it. And the only way that I've found to be able to do that effectively is really through the body. And you have to return to the senses. You have to really, it's almost like grimy. I feel it's granular. It's like really getting down to like the prickle of a thing on your skin. And I feel like the only way to access these big sort of like larger than life ideas or experiences is like the grossness of the body. I don't know. It's almost like leaning into the grotesque to try to reach the sacred. Am I just going off right now?
I mean,
or am I like onto something?
I love it, honestly. I think it's.
I'm just thinking of like body horror, and I'm like, that's why that's so powerful.
No, it's great. Honestly, I think it's great. I mean, yeah, I'm all the way with it.
We're here. We're getting somewhere.
Yeah.
Well, I think like when we talk about like the sublime and the transcendence, it's like, but it's also feeling embodied, right?
Yes,
like,
and that's not always a good thing. It's
Yes.
not always this like floaty great thing. It's like the primal grossness of like corporeality. Like having a body is so gross and weird and and fragile.
Yeah.
The whole thing is just too much. You know.
Yeah, and ultimately all of these experiences are coming from within the body,
Absolutely.
right? Like they're not.
It's telling you,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I wanted to come back to your new album, but when we were talking before this panel, when we were sort of chatting about your experiences, you mentioned that the new album was I don't want to necessarily say inspired by, but informed by a period of like profound grief that you described to me as experiencing almost in a psychedelic state. Like it was so profound that it was borderline hallucinatory.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about that, as much as you're willing to share, but what that meant to then inform your music?
Yeah, for sure. I had never been through like the loss of someone that I knew so well who wasn't like a grandparent. And I think also there is a separation between like the type of grieving you do for someone who is a peer and as someone who like you always know is way ahead of you in time. My first love died, and he died of an accidental like fentanyl overdose in the end of 2020. And I hadn't seen him in a really long time, but it's actually the first person that I knew ever like that intimately, who I knew like sort of like I have like a cellular memory of like the presence of a person. And I was in a pretty good place in my life to like accept this tragedy, even though you can never like be ready for anything like that. So I just chose to dive into it pretty hardcore because I was like, well, if I'm ever, it was not like I think a lot of people don't choose how to feel about these things, but in my case, because it was like someone who I hadn't like had a lot of close contact with in recent years, I was sort of, given a little bit more space to create how I'm gonna let this move through me. And so I just opened myself to it very wholeheartedly because I really didn't know what to do with the feelings, And I had like so many strange experiences to do with grieving. And one of the things that like stayed with me profoundly was that I think that grief and other sort of vital human experiences are kind of with you from birth and like exist inside of you and attached to events. This is like a pre-existing thing that we live with, and it causes us to have like be very moved by a film or a song or a book. And even if it's something that's like never happened to us, we can like relate to the suffering because we like live with it anyway. And I guess I put a lot of I had mentioned to you that I had sort of like auditory hallucinations of like this person's voice. And yeah, that was the other thing that it kind of stuck with me, was that like all of these things are kind of like accessible at any time. Like my experience of like knowing and loving someone is mine. It's not it's ours when we're face to face, but like this is something that I have forever, that isn't like stolen in the wake of tragedy.
Yeah. How did that inform how you were thinking about your album and the music?
Well, I mean, I was so obsessed that I was like basically writing constantly after that. I just had such an outpouring of like creative energy. Also because it's when you go through like a big event like that, it can be kind of isolating. Like people change the subject, people don't they don't know what to say, or they say something and it's not the thing you wanted to, you know. It's kind of isolating. So, so I was really deep into my own shit. And I was really I was not, as I have been on previous occasions with creating music, I was not punishing to myself about what language was being used, because like all that mattered to me was like how I felt.
Yeah.
And how I felt when I made the thing was what it means, and that's your journey to find out if you if you can.
Yeah.
You know. But yeah, that's my answer to that, I think.
I have one more question because I want to leave time for a couple questions if people have them. But and this is for all of you, because we've spent almost all of this time talking about the work you put out and, you know, your own experiences and how that informs what you do. I'd be curious to know from each of you if you've ever had, which I'm sure you have, a sublime experience as a viewer or consumer or reader or listener of someone else's art, and what was that work for you?
You
did
gonna
try.
have one of those?
I
Yeah.
did.
There's so many.
Yeah, really.
One of you's gonna be ready. I know
I
it.
know. Is it you? Yes.
It is me. I'm sure I don't know specifically, but I know in reading, I mean, when I would read things when I was very young, my mother is a very devoted Christian woman, and we grew up in a very devoted house. But so like, you know, being very young and reading things, and she was a part of this like prayer group. And my mother is an interceder, so like she is really up usually. I mean, she's up usually around like 5:30. She's always in her room. She's generally praying. She's generally journaling. And so she has these groups like on like Wednesdays, and so my sister and I would go, and they would be obviously boring because we were young and we wanted to maybe watch some TV, but there would be snacks there which entertained us. But they would sort of go over verses and talk, and as I was older now, I sort of understood that. But I think something about that, and maybe even reading books or peeking over at what was read, they had such a profound effect on me where I felt very scared of everything as a child. But I began to understand that it wasn't necessarily a fear. It's almost like, I don't know, it's like if you saw a snake come through right now, like you wouldn't technically be scared of it. It would just sort of make your skin like, whoa, that's a, you know, you would sort of come alive with the snake, and I felt like that's what the words would be. So subsequently when I would read books as I grew older, like I'd be so pulled into them, you know. And I find now like when I read things, or if I'm writing, I feel like that's probably like the ultimate state. But if like I'm writing, particularly if I'm writing stuff that comes through me, because you know you were saying it earlier, but it's like writing is really a lot for me. Like I think of the dude who was in Jurassic Park who's like, you know, he's like excavating the bones. It's like, you know, I feel a great deal of what I'm trying to say, but I don't really have the language to say it yet. So like, I gotta spill it there, and then I have to cut a bunch of stuff away. And then I'm like, you know, it's such a like an exercise within oneself that by the time I'm like really like I've clarified what needs to be said, I've like really transformed because of the allowing of myself to spill and say what needs to be said, and then to edit that and refine it, and also like not say what I need to say without sort of it being right or wrong, you know. And that entire experience I find has been quite spellbinding. So I would definitely say, maybe not any specific writer, but I think words and writing for me has been a very sort of wild ride, yeah.
Nina?
Yes, so many things to say separately about that. But gosh, I'm sure there was a concert and there was all these things, but this one thing that keeps coming to my mind, and it's like, okay, that was 20 years ago. I am remembering it now, so that's the thing. Peggy Guggenheim's museum in Venice, there's just like this incredible collection of surrealist art. And I just remember going there, and I was like 22 or something, and just like wandering through there, and I always was kind of attracted to the surrealists, and just spending like so many however many hours you could spend in a museum. You know, usually it's like a couple hours and you're saturated. And I was just in there all day long, and I was just like sobbing, and I don't even know now. I wish
what
I
the
could
work was.
Kind of encapsulate like what was it. I think there's something, I've actually had a lot of experiences crying in front of like abstract art too, like huge installations at MoMA that don't make it's like a giant room full of styrofoam or something.
Yeah.
I think what it is for me is like, this too can exist. It's like there is someone in the world that spent their time doing this, and it feels like a kind of permission.
Yeah.
And something about that is really transcendent to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think mine is more of a like sensual experience, but to do with like a friend of mine brought me like a little sprig of a lily of the valley, which, like, if you're not familiar, it's like a very small flower that sort of cascades down. There are like several different little flower heads, and it's something I've known about my whole life but never smelled it until very recently. And I think I like smelled this thing into oblivion. I just like obliterated it, and like it was like smithereens by the time I was done. Yeah. And that was I was overcome with like ecstasy smelling this thing.
Now I'm gonna find myself one.
Yeah,
that's
you
beautiful.
should find yourself
That
some.
is-
I want to ask you what it smells like,
Yeah.
but that's kind of
I don't
putting you on
even
the
know
spot.
what to
Yeah,
say.
it's just in you now. It's like
Yeah,
in your
yeah,
DNA.
Yeah.
Well,
It's gone now too.
Yeah. Thank you all. I would keep talking. I want to be mindful of time. If people do have any questions, I think there's a little time for maybe a Q&A, one or two, if anyone has any, and then also obviously the machines are here as well. But thank you all for sharing.
Thank you
You know,
for
it's a very complex conversation,
Yeah.
a complex topic, and I think hopefully that people at least leave with some inspiration or some thought about what it means to explore these things within ourselves. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions? No? It's fine if not. You can also just ask us in private. And cool?
Well,
Oh, go.
Because I assume people are going to try this.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit about your own experiences lying on these beds.
Yeah.
I think that was the question.
Yeah.
Yes. Everyone here, yes.
Fine.
About what we thought of?
Yeah.
Yes.
How did you experience it? You know, in your own kind of view, like how did this go for you?
Well, I did two, these two, but I'm sort of light sensitive, and like, so I chose not to keep going, but it wasn't like a bad thing. I just needed to like stop to not be kind of triggered.
Yeah.
I'm just like, I have sort of light anxiety. I don't know why, but it was kind of incredible to know suddenly what my eye looks like in isolation,
Yeah.
and what I saw, what I knew I was seeing, and what I saw being different.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah, well, I did this, and then the 2-person one. They were all so different. I don't want to take too much time. In this one, I cried.
Yeah.
In this one, I was like, you do know yourself. Like, I was just like, oh, I know you, and I'm good in my relationship with you, which is a pretty, that's a great takeaway for the day, so thank you all. It's going to check in with yourself, But yeah, so many things to say, and then Verena and I did this one together, and I would definitely recommend that if you can do it with someone. It's pretty incredible, because we both kind of felt like we were merging with the whole, but like each other, and it was,
That was the closest to a psychedelic experience I've ever had, totally sober. It was incredible.
Yeah, they were wonderful. I mean, having seen the photos and read on Bobby's work, I saw the images and I'm like, this is cool. And I think having the full experience being brought down, thank you to the two guides. I did, I was going to say I rode 3 of the rides, but I did 1, 2, and 3. And I enjoyed them all. Obviously, this one here that has the enclosure, I found to be real turned up. I thought it was really cool. Like the rising of the platform. I really enjoyed the enclosure, because that way I could come down from this ride. Psychologically, there's not even a thought about having to explain myself. I could just sort of get up when I want to, or sit with it for a moment. But also, like I was telling Nina and Glasser as well. I was going to call you Glasser. I just the specificity of certain things there. It was like you see these fluffy balls and it seems like it's like a Discovery Zone ball pit or like Chuck E. Cheese, but it's like very intricate. And seeing like my eye in the small of the eye was like, wow. As I said, I'm like, this is very, very. This is completely this is a full, complete thought.
Yeah.
This isn't haphazard. This is actually quite intentional.
Yeah.
And so, very beautiful.
Yeah.
Great question, David.
It feels sophisticated. Or one of the guides, and I cannot remember what their name was, but I was saying the same, like,
Steve.
Oh, yeah. I don't think it was Steve.
Hi, Steve.
But Steve, yes. Yeah, you kind of see the outside, and it has like a very DIY quality to it, but the experience of it is incredibly sophisticated. Just like the size of the balls and the perspective, and so I just want to learn more now.
Well, without further ado, everyone get in the machines. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you all for being here.
Great, good. That's not what I was going to say. I was going to say that the guy told me it was intentional. Yes. Yes, to leave it like that instead of making it like, I forgot what I was saying.